Uhuru! Uhuru, everyone. Welcome to the Reparations Study Group. I am honored to be your host, Jackson Hollingsworth, proud member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. And I want to appreciate our guest speaker tonight, Chair Jesse Nevel, who is the National Chair of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. Uhuru, Chair Jesse.
Uhuru, Jackson. Good to be here.
Uhuru, wonderful. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement, if you're new, welcome. We are an organization under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. We are the mass organization of the African People's Solidarity Committee, the cadre organization of white people and other people under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. We organize in the white community who organizes in the white community for reparations. And Uhuru Solidarity Movement is the mass organization of the African People's Solidarity Committee. So our three principles of unity in the Uhuru Solidarity Movement are: one, that we organize under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Two, we recognize that African people have the right to lead their own struggle. We don't tell them what to do. They organize their struggle for liberation. And three, we organize in the white community for reparations. And those reparations go to the economic programs of the African People's Socialist Party, including the Black Power Blueprint economic programs that are headquartered in the St. Louis-Ferguson area and are elsewhere around the country and shortly the world, building economic and social programs led by the Black community that empowers their community. And they just built a beautiful stage in the new outdoor space across the way from the new Uhuru House Community Center in St. Louis, Missouri. There's new photos up on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter today of the beautiful outdoor venue that is also going to be a marketplace for Black community members to have commerce amongst each other and resources circulating within the community, and to have a community garden provide healthy food for the community there in the midst of a horrible food desert, aka starvation. So it's really incredible building different programs like that in the hands of the Black community, empowering themselves, control over food, clothing, housing, commerce, etc. So that's where our reparations go. And before we begin our study, I want to salute our leadership in the African People's Socialist Party. And if you have your Burning Spear newspaper with you, which is the newspaper of the African People's Socialist Party, you can turn to page 8. Although if you have the January issue, which you should have, I recommend, on the back is a poster, on this side, is a poster for the African People's Socialist Party Plenary or Planning Conference that's coming up this February 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. And right here you see Chairman Omali Yeshitela himself, Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party and African Socialist International. So salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who also, his most recent book is Vanguard, The Advanced Attachment of the African Revolution, that I'll be referencing today. I highly recommend getting it. Is the political report to the 7th Congress of the African People's Socialist Party, summing up the political climate that we're in, the crisis of imperialism, and what the African People's Socialist Party and Uhuru movement have done since 1972, and what they, what the party has to be doing right now and is doing in future to ensure the unification and liberation of Africa, which will ensure the liberation of everyone from this white power capitalist colonial system. So highly recommend getting this at burningspearmarketplace.com, where you can also get your Burning Spear newspaper. So salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela, our leadership, and salute the other members of the African People's Socialist Party National Steering Committee. On page 8, you can see the National Central Committee of the African People's Socialist Party. There we are. Including Deputy Chair Onezene Yeshitela, who leads all of the economic work of the African People's Socialist Party, including the Black Power Blueprint. So salute Onezene Yeshitela. And salute Akile Anai, who is the Director of Agitation and Propaganda of the African People's Socialist Party. And included in that is being the editor-in-chief of the Burning Spear newspaper. So salute them. And also salute Penny Hess. One second. who is the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, who you can see right here on page 11. She is the editor of the column White Solidarity with Black Power from the African People's Solidarity Committee. And so we will be reading an article from that column written by our own chair, Jesse Nevel, who again is on the call with us tonight. So again, salute Chair Jesse, Uhuru. So before we begin our article, and I encourage everyone, ask your questions, ask your comments. Let me see here. I want to appreciate everyone tuning in. Appreciate Tachara Masimba of the African People's Socialist Party and Black Power Blueprint, who's tuning in. Uhuru, salute. Uhuru Tachara. And we also have Evan Garner, who is a USM member in North Carolina in Asheville, Paula Lipsy from Arizona, Ron Hudson from Seattle, and Johan Bedingfield from Clearwater. Uhuru. And before we begin our study, which I would encourage everyone to, this is the place to submit your questions, to make your comments. This is, a place to deepen all of our political education. And so I encourage, all of you to, participate in this discussion of this critical issue. Today's episode is called White People Who Want Socialism Fight for Reparations. So we'll be talking about socialism, obviously talking about reparations as the reparations study group. And I want to say, why we studied the Burning Spear newspaper briefly, because we're 10 minutes in. The African People's Socialist Party's newspaper, the Burning Spear newspaper, has been in print since 1968. And it is the revolutionary African working class perspective versus the lies of the bourgeois media, the real fake news. It is through the eyes of the African working class, and it tells the truth about the political social system that we're in. It tells the truth about the world and what people are truly experiencing on not just the continent of Africa and the Black community in the U.S. and elsewhere. But there's articles on what's happening in Europe, in St. Louis, etc. And it is biased in favor of the African working class and other oppressed peoples, other colonized peoples. It does not, permit, white nationalism to be in its pages. It does not, it is from their perspective, and it is, for their liberation. And we sell the Burning Spear newspaper as organizers in the Uhuru Solidarity movement, as white people, because we recognize that, we as white people are so much, in our little bubbles of whiteness, and we don't recognize, what it is to be, as Malcolm X said, sitting on the hot stove. The person looking at the hot stove isn't going to have a different experience of what that is than the person sitting on the hot stove. So, we want to see the world how it really is, because only through that are we able to know what action to take in order to change it and make the world that we all want to see. So, the Spear expresses the political theory of African internationalism, which is the theory of the African People's Socialist Party by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, that sums up that that capitalism was born parasitic through colonialism, through Europe and the white world's attack on Africa, and from there, the indigenous people of the so-called Americas and other people around the world, and that African liberation will, the social system will not be able to survive a liberated Africa. And so that is why African liberation will lead to all our liberation from this parasitic social system that isn't even good for us white people. So I encourage everyone to participate in this study and ask your question. And also to check out other ways of studying African internationalism, such as the Omali Taught Me Sunday Studies, every Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern from Chairman Omali Yeshitela at youtube.com/UhuruTV and facebook.com/omali.yeshitela. So, Uhuru. So we're going to dive into our article. And I want to see, Chair Jesse, would you like to begin reading? Or I can.
Uhuru, yes. First, I just want to appreciate the overview, and I want to join you in saluting the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, and I want to especially salute Chairman Amalia Shatella, who wrote a very powerful call to the entire Uhuru movement to build the upcoming plenary conference of the African People's Socialist Party, which was largely the inspiration for the article that we're going to read. It is also quoted in that article. So I think that's an important kind of supplemental document that I would encourage people to look at is the call to the plenary that the chairman wrote, which is available on apspplenary.org. And also, I really want to salute the amazing interview that Chairman Amalia Shatella did on the Carl Nelson radio show recently.
Yeah.
And I know that Chairman's Facebook page has been releasing clips of that interview where the Chairman has been addressing all of the most cutting-edge questions of our time, including even things like the so-called Megxit, as they're calling it, Meghan Markle and the other guy, I don't remember his name, the prince, departure from the royal family, so-called, and the upheaval that is causing. He had some great insights on that, as well as the question of socialism and whether or not socialism is relevant to African people, which of course his response was a resounding yes, and he explained why. So I want to salute that, and I also want to salute the comrades in St. Petersburg, Florida, and International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, who had a press conference this morning to build a campaign against the city government and the dirty slumlords that are threatening to deprive the people of Bethel Heights of being able to live there and have water and be able to survive. And the community is fighting back. And Jamie Simpson from the Uhuru Solidarity Movement was there representing solidarity from the white community with the African community of St. Pete and the struggle that they're waging right now. So, Uhuru. And yes, I can begin reading this article. So this was published a Burning Spear column, White Solidarity with Black Power, and it's called White People Who Want Socialism, Fight for Reparations to African People, Build the African People's Socialist Party Plenary Conference in 2020. Are you one of the millions of white people who are fed up with capitalism and ready for socialism?
Yes.
According to a recent study, over 70% of white millennials are on the same page as you. Instead of settling for the non-socialism of Bernie Sanders and his ilk, the place to be for white people who want to take a true stance for socialist revolution is at the plenary conference of the African People's Socialist Party on February 1st through the 3rd in St. Petersburg, Florida. I want to make a quick intervention there because we mentioned possibly the most well-known self-proclaimed socialist in the white world right now, which is Bernard Sanders, who is one of the front-runners in the Democratic presidential primary. And right now, there's all of this uproar over the supposed feud that has surfaced to the public eye between Bernie Sanders, who is a self-defined socialist, although we will discuss in this column how that is so far from the truth, and Elizabeth Warren, who is a self-defined capitalist, but somehow gets away with being regarded as one of the other so-called progressive candidates in the Democratic race. And Elizabeth Warren is going after Bernie Sanders because she claims that Bernie Sanders once said that he didn't think a woman would ever be able to become president of the United States. So in light of the Women's March that is coming up, I just wanted to quickly comment on that because, now Team Bernie is going into a rage to defend Bernie Sanders and his platform against this unfounded attack, and then Team Warren is moving into action to say that Bernie is just another patriarchist and that people should vote for Elizabeth Warren, and I think we should say a plague on both their houses.
Yes.
And we're not really interested in whether a man or a woman or anybody else becomes president of the U.S. empire. That is does it make a difference to me whether it is a man or a woman who is deciding to drop bombs on children in Iraq or put drone strikes against weddings in Pakistan or flood the black community inside this country with the police. That doesn't represent liberation for anybody. So I'm not really concerned with that false debate between Sanders and Warren. And, you know, the whole idea that these people can be considered progressive when both of them have nothing to say about the oppression of African people in this country and the need for reparations to African people is just a joke. Anyway, back to the article. White people are invited to attend and stand in solidarity with this historic conference whose theme is Vanguard Up, Unity of Theory and Practice. The African People's Socialist Party calls on us, white people, unite with the struggle for reparations to African people as a revolutionary demand and the basis for genuine socialism, the redistribution of the stolen wealth to the colonized and oppressed peoples of the world. Reparations are owed for hundreds of years of colonial violence, slavery, convict leasing, mass incarceration, police murder, medical torture, and other forms of oppression and exploitation that continue to this day. The entire capitalist enterprise is built on white terror that enriched the white population as a whole at the expense of African people. The African People's Socialist Party formed the African People's Solidarity Committee in 1976 as a way for white people to enter into a principled relationship to the African liberation struggle. And I'll turn it over to Jackson.
The APSP restores meaning to the words socialism, revolution, and reparations. In his powerful call to build the party's plenary, which is also in the January issue of the Burning Spear newspaper, Chairman Omali Yeshitela threw down the gauntlet on the wide array of faux socialist opportunists masquerading their unity with imperialism behind radical sloganeering and empty buzzwords. The chairman points out that you don't just get to call yourself a socialist. Socialism isn't promising to raise the wage for workers to $15 per hour. That's not socialism. The chairman explains that opportunists throw around words like socialism and revolution to fill the vacuum. There's a quote from chairman. To fill the vacuum created by the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, a time when revolution expressed itself mightily in almost every language, in almost every place on the planet, as the main trend of the world, end quote. Even the word reparations is getting thrown around today by the likes of Kamala Harris, Elizabeth Warren, and even Forbes magazine. These opportunistic proponents of the status quo are forced to adopt the language of revolution because they are responding to and trying to misdirect the legitimate yearnings of the masses who want real revolution. African people are resisting, and there is a growing desire among young white people for genuine social change. Further, the chairman has no patience for the, quote, time warp tendency, as he called it in his book, An Uneasy Equilibrium, to hide behind nostalgic memories of the past as a refuge from the responsibilities of the present era. At a time when the capitalist system is in deep crisis, African people are fighting back, and even millions of white people are becoming open to the idea of socialism. Never before has it been more important to answer the question, what is socialism really? The chairman gives the most brilliant explanation. Quote, the achievement of socialism can only come about through the defeat of capitalism. To be a genuine socialist is to be engaged in struggle to defeat capitalism that owes its existence and success to colonial slavery. To be a genuine socialist is to engage in the struggle to destroy the colonial pedestal upon which the capitalist parasite lives and thrives. To be a socialist in an era of colonial capitalist rule is to be a revolutionary, consumed by the struggle to replace the cruel colonial capitalist state with the state of the liberated, armed African working class. As the chairman put it, end quote. As the chairman put it another way, quote, the road to socialism is painted black, end quote. Uhuru. Chair Jesse, would you like to do the next section?
Uhuru. APSC is a front of the African revolutionary struggle for socialism. APSC chairwoman Penny Hess has explained that APSC's job is to function as, quote, an extension of the African Revolution inside of the white oppressor nation population. APSC's work is to fight for socialism by organizing amongst the white population, organizing all sectors of white society to realize our genuine interests and future in solidarity with African people. Our work, as defined by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, goes beyond anti-racist education or well-wishing and calls for true material solidarity with the African Revolution. Chairman Omali Yeshitela created APSC as a practical manifestation of his political theory of African internationalism, which exposed that parasitic capitalism was born as white power through the enslavement and colonization of Africans and other oppressed peoples whose stolen labor, lives, and resources form the foundation for white people's prosperity, opportunity, and power. All white people sit on the pedestal of the oppression of African people, and therefore all white people owe reparations. At the Plenary Conference, APSC and our mass organization, the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, will have the honor of delivering our reports to the leadership and membership of the African People's Socialist Party. We will be laying out our plans to escalate the work of challenging the moneyed sector of the white population, including the upper echelons of Wall Street, the private prison industry, and the colonial diamond trade, to pay reparations to African people in the U.S. and around the world. We will report on our regional recruitment and organizing tour in January to travel throughout the U.S. and host events, meetings, and workshops. There will also be presentations on the history of APSC, the work to build solidarity with the Black Power Blueprint in St. Louis, and reports on the work of the economic institutions in which APSC members have the honor of working under the leadership of Deputy Chair Ona Zanea-Shatella, including the Uhuru Furniture Stores and Uhuru Foods and Pies. The keynote speaker at the plenary will be our leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, who will present his political report to the plenary, the resolution which will guide the work of the entire movement for the upcoming period. This plenary will mark a turning point in the African Revolution. Be a part of history and register to attend at apspplenary.org. Salute the vanguard of the African Revolution, solidarity with the African People's Socialist Party, unity through reparations.
Wonderful. I'm just making sure that the link to register is in the comments here. And I really want to appreciate this article, Chair Jesse, that you yourself wrote, inspired by the chairman writing about the plenary and socialism. And I also want to appreciate everyone tuning in. We have Leah from Minneapolis, so Uhuru, Leah or Leah. Also Ali Aiello from St. Pete. Nick on YouTube says good evening. Mr. John D. Henry, Uhuru, blessings, sending positive energy your way for healing and spiritual growth and protection. Uhuru, from Henry's family in Georgetown, South Carolina. Appreciate that. And Uhuru, Mr. John D. Henry on YouTube. And we also have on Facebook, we have Mads Ambrose from Portland. We have E. Zandman is the Facebook name. So I salute you, comrade. I see Santosh from St. Pete on here. And Virginia Wilson from Louisville, Kentucky. And other members as well that I cannot see, but I appreciate and salute you, and other people watching on Facebook and YouTube as well. So I really want to appreciate that, Chair Jesse, and express my unity with it. One thing that really stood out to me was, of course, the chairman's section on to be a socialist in an era of colonial capitalist rule is to be a revolutionary. So you can't be a socialist without being a revolutionary. And to be a revolutionary, you have to be, quote, consumed by the struggle to replace the cruel colonial capitalist state with the state of the liberated, armed African working class. And I know we've talked a little bit about the state in past studies. I wonder if you could elaborate on that, Chair Jesse, about replacing, the cruel colonial capitalist state with the state of the liberated, armed African working class, and what that means, and an idea of what that might look like.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Jackson. And before I do that, I just want to thank everybody who's tuning in, and especially want to give a shout out to Leah Fifield, who is absolutely one of the top fundraisers of the Reparations Challenge campaign of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement every single month, just making a very profound contribution to the work of the Uhuru movement and the Black Power Blueprint. So, Uhuru to you. Very excited to meet you in St. Petersburg at the Plenary coming up.
Awesome.
So, really excited about that. Just want to give a special shout out to you for setting such a great example for all of us in the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. So, Uhuru. And as far as the question, I definitely can talk about that, and I also really want to encourage other people tuning in. Send in your questions. The point of these studies are actually for you, the people that are listening right now. This is all about developing our understandings of African internationalism so that we can be better armed to go out in the world and recruit other people and raise money for reparations and build branches and build events and even carry out our campaign to target the prison system and the diamond industry. Like, in order to do that, we have to be armed. And when I say armed, I mean, first and foremost, we have to be armed ideologically. We have to be armed politically, because we have to be prepared to defend the party and the African working class and the African working class philosophy of African internationalism against all agents of imperialism who will attempt to discredit it or pick it apart or bring it down. We have to be prepared to defend it, to uphold it, and to fight for it. And that's why we're having these studies. So, this is not like navel-gazing, beard-stroking, kind of, corn cob pipe, or whatever it's called, armchair revolutionary chit-chat hour that we have here on YouTube and Facebook for you. Although we are sitting in armchairs, this is about doing something. This is about being able to take action and build reparations in a stronger way. So if you've got somebody that's working with you that keeps asking you about, the Uhuru movement's position on China or something like that, and you're like, I don't really know, but, I'll look into it, and you want to know, ask us here. We will either be able to answer your question, or we will be able to direct you to the place where you can get your question answered. So just wanted to say that. Please feel comfortable. Please feel free to speak up and send in your questions. So as for the question of the state, so I love that quote. That's why I used it in the article, and I've quoted it several times because I just think it's such a powerful statement that the chairman made. I would wear that on a T-shirt.
That's great.
Yeah. Like, just to be able to say what socialism means now, because it is one of those words that, like, like a piece of paper with a message on it that passes through so many people's hands that the ink gets smudged and it doesn't say anything or mean anything anymore. That's kind of what the word socialism has become. And I appreciate that the chairman has rescued that word from the hands of those opportunists who would attempt to smudge its definition into non-existence. And he's just given, he's not even giving like just some general universal definition, although there is a basic general universal definition for socialism, which is that it's the point at which the capitalist state has been destroyed and the workers' state comes into power. The working class becomes the ruling class, and the working class controls the means of production. What are the means of production? That's the factories, that's the raw materials, that's everything that it takes to produce value. That would be owned by the workers instead of being owned privately by a capitalist or by somebody who owns the means of production privately, while the means of the process of production is social. So that's socialism in general. But as the chairman says, in the colonial context, you have to say a little bit more, because there's no such thing as workers in general. The real crux of the class struggle, as the chairman says, is in the anti-colonial struggle, because the world is not split between bosses and workers. The world is split between the colonizer and the colonized.
Yeah.
And even among the colonizer population, the boss and the worker within the colonizer population are feeding off of the blood and resources of the colonized. So that's the real class struggle in the world. Therefore, the real working class, or the real revolutionary working class, or the proletariat as they call it, is the African working class and colonized workers and poor peasants throughout the world. So the other day, during the Sunday study, somebody sent in a question to the chairman saying, well, how do you know that the vanguard party of the workers is not going to end up becoming the new bourgeoisie? And I appreciated that question, because you hear, I'm sure people have heard that in the white community. People say, well, how do you know that your group isn't going to become the new oppressor? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. People say stuff like that.
They do.
And the chairman had a brilliant answer. He said that the process of the African People's Socialist Party becoming victorious and the African working class coming to power as the new ruling class is a process through which the material basis for the existence of a bourgeoisie or of a capitalist ruling class ceases to exist. The whole relationship between labor and profit and all of that is torn to pieces, because the whole process of producing value through labor becomes under the control of the workers. So the material basis for the existence of a bourgeoisie is actually destroyed in the process of the African working class coming to power. And now on the question of the state. So the state is a term that we should all be comfortable with, because it's a political term in this case. It's not like the state of Florida or my state of mind. That's another use of the word state. That's not the state. The state is a particular thing in political language, which is, it refers to the organizations of violence and coercion that are used by the class that's in power to maintain their position of power and to maintain the class structure that exists in any given society. So that is true in general. And, the chairman often gives examples. The court system is part of the state. The police are part of the state. The Navy and the Marines and the U.S. Army and all these different things are part of the state. And the state exists in pretty much any type of society where there's any class division. So the state existed under feudalism, except it was a feudal state. And the chairman always gives the popular examples of, like, the sheriff of Nottingham and, different things like that, where the primary purpose of the state under feudalism was to protect the power and supremacy of the landlords and the aristocracy over the serfs, over the feudal serfs. So that was the purpose of the state under feudalism. And that was a state that was kind of localized within places throughout the continent that later came to be called Europe. Okay. Then, with the rise of capitalism, with the assault on Africa, with the invasion of Africa by European colonizers, and enslavement of millions of African people, transformation of millions of African people into commodities and forced to work on slave plantations for hundreds of years for nothing. And through the genocide of the indigenous people, the theft of half of Mexico from the indigenous people of that land, and the total, theft of all of this land, of this continent from the indigenous people, a capitalist state came into being. And the capitalist state, as the chairman said, was different from the feudal state for a couple of reasons. One, the capitalist state came into existence as an international state power. So the capitalist state does not only exist inside of the United States and Europe, it exists all around the world because capitalism was born as a world system. Capitalism was born as global white power that took over the entire planet Earth almost and put the majority of the world's peoples under the gun of the United States and European power. So you see the capitalist state, you see the imperialist and capitalist state in Africa, in Latin America. You see it you just saw it in Iraq with the blasting away of an Iranian general. You see it all around the world. You're looking at the state, and you see it in its raw and naked form inside this country with the mass incarceration of African people, the fact that 1 out of 8 human beings who's imprisoned on the planet Earth is an African inside the United States. Over half the 2.5 million people who are in prison are African people. Africans are murdered literally every single day by police and white vigilantes in this country. Everything. This is the way the court system operates, the two-tiered so-called justice system. You're looking at the state, not to mention the white militiamen and border patrol and ICE that commit genocide against the Mexican people and line the false illegitimate colonial borders separating the Mexican people from their land with mass graves that contain the skeletons of hundreds of Mexican people, including children who have been massacred there. Not to mention the federal agents who stalk the so-called reservations, which are really concentration camps where indigenous people are forced to live and die at 42 years old, average life expectancy. You're looking at the state. And, the state, the North American state was born through enslaving Africans and killing indigenous people. And the final point I want to make about the state, that it's extremely important for us to understand that Chairman Omali Yeshitela has really laid out. Because, by the way, other people have written about the state, like, Vladimir Lenin wrote about the state, but everything that I just said, that's Chairman Omali Yeshitela's, advanced understanding of the state. The chairman is the one who really took the state and looked at it from a completely anti-colonial African working class standpoint and was able to understand certain things about the state. So this analysis that you're hearing is purely Chairman Omali Yeshitela's African internationalist understanding of the question of the state. And one really important thing that he explained with regards to the white power state is that it was born as a white people's state. And that's a pretty profound concept to think about. And I just want to mention one thing about that, Jackson, if I may.
Yes.
So what the chairman means by that is that, the process through which the organizations of violence and coercion, which maintain the relationship between the haves and the have-nots, which prevent homeless people from being able to live in a home without rent, or which prevent hungry people from being able to go in a grocery store and get food without paying. What makes those things possible is the state, is that the police will come in and arrest you. That's the state. The state maintains the status quo. It maintains the class relationship between the colonized and uncolonized, the oppressor and the oppressed, the haves and the have-nots, especially those who have as a consequence of stealing everything they have from those who now have not. So the way that state came to being was not like, it just popped out of the sky and all of a sudden aliens, dropped a bunch of pods that then cracked open and police officers jumped out with guns and all of a sudden there was the state. That's not how it happened. The way it happened was regular old white people got together, came to this land, killed the indigenous people, formed armed, roving bands of killers, of white killers, who got together to carry out the so-called manifest destiny, to carry out the project of imperialist conquest. And it was, slave patrols, white people who owned Africans as human beings. The runaway slave patrols were the embryo of the modern day police entity. The modern day police department has its roots in the runaway slave patrols. The modern day immigrations and customs enforcement has its roots in regular old groups of white people banding together with guns to kill indigenous people and rip their scalps off and rape women and mutilate their bodies and do other horrendous things. Regular white people, lynch mobs. What happened with lynchings? Lynchings happened in this country for over 100 years, where Africans were rounded up and burned alive and tortured in front of thousands of white people as a kind of fun spectacle of sadism for hundreds of years in this country. Why did lynchings end? The only thing that happened is that the lynchings were moved indoors because the decline in lynching coincides with the emergence of the death penalty in this country. So all they did was move the lynching into an electric chair, and after that you saw the great increase in the rate of incarceration and execution by the state of African people. It's state-sanctioned lynching, just as it was back then. So this is the origin of the state, the white people state, the imperialist state, the white power state, and this is why we have to break away from the white people's state, because even in our regular old quote-unquote innocent white lives, we are unwitting agents of the white power state. We are beneficiaries of the white power state. And when the moment that we step away from that and break apart from that and say that we refuse to stand by while the police and the U.S. government and the army and the imperialist state power murders and bludgeons and pillages and rapes the peoples of the world in our name for our presumed advantage, we take a stand for reparations to African people, then we become a weakness in the white power state. We defect from the reserve army of imperialism that is supposed to be the entire general white population. So I know there's a lot more we could say, but that's kind of the overview I wanted to give on the question of the state,
Uhuru, I really appreciate that, Chair Jesse, and I thank you for delving deeply into that. I've been taking notes. I encourage everyone else to, I'm circling and underlining and taking notes on my Burning Spear newspaper. I encourage you to do the same. We do have a question from E. Zandman on Facebook. Asking how are you guys on Mao? So I guess what does the Uhuru movement think of Mao Zedong? And Evan Garner responded to this question, saying, good question, E. Mao and China today are two different realities. And I wonder, Chair Jesse, if you could address, the Uhuru movement's perspective on Mao.
Yeah. So who asked that question?
E. Zandman. I know that. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on E. Zandman's name in everyday life, but I know on Facebook is E. Zandman.
Do you know where they're located?
I'm afraid I do not. Let me see. Oh, from the Netherlands. I'm sorry. Yes, because earlier he had said, "I am from the Netherlands. Good luck with your work." Smiley face. And also,
great.
Yes.
All right. Well, great to have you on.
Yes.
So the Uhuru movement, the chairman and the African People's Socialist Party definitely respects the Chinese Revolution that was led by Chairman Mao Zedong, and really upholds the example that was one of the great strikes against imperialism that was made by the oppressed and colonized peoples of the world. And there's certainly a lot from Mao and from the Chinese Revolution that we study in the Uhuru movement, especially pieces like combat liberalism, which is helpful for all revolutionaries to study over and over again, and other pieces that he wrote. So, we definitely respect Mao as a very historically significant figure, and an important anti-colonial revolutionary.
Uhuru. Great. We also, in fact, the Burning Spear newspaper and other publications of the party have published Mao's combat liberalism before as well. We have some questions on YouTube. First from Ali Ayello asking, so will the state no longer exist in a liberated world, or would the state just be controlled by the workers?
Okay, great question. So if you have any comments you want to chime in, please feel free. But yeah, so I can take a stab at that one.
Okay.
So yeah, that's a really good question, and there's kind of two answers to it. Well, first of all, the quote, which I never even actually answered the question you asked earlier, was about that specific quote. What the chairman says is that a socialist today must be a revolutionary consumed by the struggle to replace the cruel colonial capitalist state with the state of the armed, liberated African working class. So the struggle is not simply for the African working class to take control of the state, because the bourgeois state has to be destroyed. And the chairman has given examples of situations where socialists have actually come to power by being elected or in other ways, but the state was still, the capitalist state was still the bourgeois state, so the state was still under the control of the imperialists, and therefore, they were able to stage a coup or do something else to basically push the socialist leader out of power and prevent there from being any forward motion or progress. And that's a whole other discussion that we could get into, but that's one quick point to make, is that first and foremost, the capitalist state has to be crushed. And in the process of doing that, I mean, the only way you can do that is by building a revolutionary party and a revolutionary movement that has the capacity to actually destroy the capitalist state. So in the process of doing that, the African workers' state comes into being. The African workers' state is being built as we speak through all of the work of the party to build, to build dual power and to build even black community control of the police and different institutions that are designed to defend the interests of the African working class against the colonial state. So at the end of the day, socialism is the stage at which the bourgeois state and the bourgeoisie, the white ruling class, has been defeated, and their state power has been replaced by an African workers' socialist state power, also sometimes referred to as the dictatorship of the African proletariat. Dictatorship, in this case, not being some scary word that should send us screaming for the hills, but meaning simply that the African working class will have full authority to do everything that is needed to defend their liberation against any attempt by the now removed from power bourgeoisie or white ruling class to try to regain power. Because the imperialism is never more vicious than when it has been kicked out of power. And that has been seen in Nicaragua, where immediately after, it's been seen really in every single revolution, even in Russia, immediately after the Russian Revolution, Russia was surrounded by European and American imperialists. After the Nicaraguan Revolution, they went in with the Contra rebels backed by the CIA and immediately tried to overturn that revolution. So, pockets of the bourgeoisie will still exist for a time after the revolution takes place. And the purpose of the African workers' state is to defend and protect the liberation of African people and the power of the African working class to control their own lives and resources. So there will be far less prisons, because the prisons will be emptied of all of the colonial subjects who currently fill them. But some of those prisons will need to stay in use, because there will be the enemies of humanity who have shed the blood of billions, who will need to be put in those prisons if they're lucky. And as the chairman has explained, under a socialist state, under an African workers' state, anything which attempts to restore slavery and capitalism will not be permitted. So if someone tries to set up a publishing company to publish newspapers about why Africans should be re-enslaved, the African workers' state would shut down their publishing company, and I celebrate that. That's great. That's the kind of world I want to live in. Now, ultimately, and this is a much longer discussion, but ultimately, as the chairman says, socialism is defined as the early stage of communism.
Yep.
So socialism is the stage where, yes, it is still necessary for there to be an African workers' state, but ultimately, when the international bourgeoisie has been sufficiently suppressed, and the whole world has been reorganized around the struggle, around the cause of international socialism, there will eventually not be a need for a state. And at that point, when the workers are the rulers of the world, the ruling class of the world, and ruling over their own lives, the purpose of the state becomes unnecessary. And that's the stage at which genuine communism, which is the absence of state power and really the absence of class distinction altogether, comes into being. But we can't get there without the socialist stage in history, which will be defined by the ascendancy of the African working class state and, colonized workers of the world.
Uhuru. Thank you, Chair Jesse. I want to unite with that. And I also know that in Vanguard and also in Uneasy Equilibrium, the chairman lays out the more detail on what a liberated Africa will look like, and summing up the parasitism of capitalism, and about the need for African people to have self-government and the dictatorship of the African working class. So I encourage you to get both of those and read those sections. There towards the end in the Theory of African Internationalism, which is a chapter in both Vanguard and in Uneasy Equilibrium. We have 5 minutes left, but we do have another question on YouTube. I also want to give a shout out to Maud, who is tuning in from the Bronx. Let me see. All right. And then Leah has a question on YouTube. Does a socialist society mean that worker-owned and operated cooperatives would be the norm? If not, how would workers be organized? ? And I know that you can speak a lot about that, Chair Jesse. We also have 4 minutes left, so I know that we could spend hours, about this. But
I think the answer is basically yes.
Okay.
We could certainly expound for quite a bit, but yeah, it would be, essentially, it would be worker-run factories and different things of that nature. So.
Mm-hmm. And I know that the Uhuru movement is, providing some guidance and leadership to a tenants council that is that has been formed here in St. Pete, that you mentioned earlier, Chair Jesse, that just had a press conference for the tenants to have control of their complex and have their needs met. And I know in the APSP organizing manual, it sums up how there needs to be democratic, centralist run cooperatives and councils, from businesses to blocks to complexes, and would reflect itself even on those living in the same household.
Uhuru.
So
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I really appreciate these questions, and I'm really happy that people submitted their questions. And I hope people come back, and you can also email us info@uhurusolidarity.org if there's questions that you want us to address later. And also, please mark off on your calendar the chairman's Sunday studies, because you should bring your questions there before anything, and bring your questions to the chairman himself. And his studies are incredible every single Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern. And I really want to urge you all, if you are not members of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, to join, because we can't be cafe revolutionaries. We want socialism, we want revolution, so we have to be in the movement. We have to be active, we have to join. we have to be involved in building this new socialist world. And that means for white people, the only legitimate way to fight for socialism is to join under the leadership of the African Revolution, the African People's Socialist Party. The organizational vehicle that the party has created for us to do that is the African People's Solidarity Committee and the Uhuru Solidarity Movement. So if you have not already, join the fight for genuine socialism, join the fight for reparations to African people, which is the precondition for genuine socialism, and become a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement before the night is over.
Uhuru, yes, I want to unite with that. Go to uhurusolidarity.org and click join or become a member. You can also pay reparations tonight through membership or by, if you're already a member or are, on the fence a little bit, press pay reparations, and you can pay reparations right now. I'm wearing my Make America Pay Reparations t-shirt. Really want to salute everyone who who asked those questions. I put our email in there of info@uhurusolidarity.org. Sylvia Baker from the Bahamas. I appreciate all you do to I appreciate all you do to bring knowledge and awareness to the people. Uhuru. Wonderful. Oops. No. Okay, there we are. All right, so we are at time, so I'm just going to go through the announcements. Of course, top thing, Uhuru Solidarity Movement 2020 National Convention, April 18th and 19th is a Saturday and Sunday in St. Louis, Missouri. Register at the link that will be posted in the comments. Our next reparations study group. I also put in the comments the info for O'Malley Taught Me Sunday Studies. So tune into that. And then Reparations Study Group Episode 7, Vanguard Up, the Unity of Theory and Practice. We'll be talking more about the plenary at the link provided in the comments. And the plenary itself, register at apspplenary.org for February 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Come for all 3 days, or if you can only come for, 1 day, part of a day, come for whatever you can, because you don't want to miss it. This Sunday, January 20th, is the MLK Day event and volunteer project with the Uhuru Furniture and Collectibles in Philadelphia. You can register at the link that will be posted in the comments. And for any questions about MLK Day, there is a phone number and an email. And also this Saturday is a live political education study with Penny Hess on African internationalism and white solidarity with Black Power. That's Saturday, January 18th at 8 p.m. Eastern on youtube.com/Uhuru Solidarity and facebook.com/Uhuru Solidarity. So here in St. Pete, we're having a viewing party of that. So if you're in St. Pete, email us and we'll, or go to our Facebook page, or find us on Eventbrite, and you'll be able to come with us on Saturday at Community Acupuncture, and also salute Greg Jones, who is a member of USM, who kindly lent his space for that. All right, we are at 8:02. I know our moderator is scrambling to get all of those links that I just gave into the comments. And I want to see Chair Jesse, any closing remarks?
Thank you, Jackson, for hosting this study consistently, weekly. I think it's an extremely important institution of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement.
Yeah.
And I want to really, really invite everyone to come to the study with APSC Chairwoman Penny Hess. I cannot overstate how valuable it is to be directly in a political education study with Chairwoman Penny, who has been forged and steeled under the direct leadership of Chairman Amalia Shatella literally since day one of the founding of the African People's Solidarity Committee. She is the only person on the planet Earth that I could say that sentence about accurately. So this is just an incredible opportunity to learn and to deepen our understandings of Chairman Amalia Shatella's theory of African internationalism, and also to understand how it informs our practice as white people building solidarity with Black Power in a really profound way. So do not miss your opportunity to be in this, and it's actually going to be a monthly study series hosted by APSC. So definitely join us this Saturday night. for the study with Chairwoman Penny Hess.
Uhuru, thank you, Chair Jesse. I want to really appreciate you and all your leadership of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement under APSC and the African People's Socialist Party, and appreciate everyone who is tuning in on YouTube and Facebook. Please continue to share, and for those watching it, after work or etc. And just appreciate everyone. If you haven't gone already, become a member of the Uhuru Solidarity Movement, and let's build this front of the African liberation movement, build the reparations movement, and true socialism. Uhuru.
Uhuru.